We now know all the offerings it takes to keep the Israelites clean, pure, and holy. But now we need a set of priests to help them stay that way. Will Aaron and his sons follow all the procedures that are laid out before them? Or will they mess up? Let's find out. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to How He Talks Bible. In my previous video, I went over the topic of different offerings that were given in order to forgive things such as like sin or unintentionally just being against God without even realizing you're doing it, but still being guilty. So with this, we now have chapter 8 and 9. They talk about the priesthood. Now the priests were the ones that were going into the tabernacle to make the sacrifices and offerings on behalf of all the Israelites. So this is where we're going to pick up at today. Now, what we're picking up is chapter 8, and it's going to go into detail. I'm not going to read again. This is just going to be kind of like a breakdown. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail. This stuff is a lot of rules and regulations, a lot of which we do not deal with today. It's really interesting to read, though I know it's kind of hard for some people. I can understand that. But it goes into just the ordination of Aaron and his sons into the priesthood. And this was actually discussed back in Exodus. But the tabernacle had yet to be built. So now the tabernacle has been built, and Lord is now with the people in the tabernacle. So now the priests have to be ordained in order to make all these sacrifices and offerings on behalf of the Israelites to the Lord. And it just kind of goes into detail also on how the sacrifices and offerings began and things of that nature, and talks about how the ceremony for the ordination went on for 7 days. And towards the end of these 7 days is when Aaron went into the tabernacle and made all the inaugural sacrifices. And the sacrifices he made were representations of all the offerings that I listed back in my previous video. If you haven't seen that video, I suggest you go back and check it out. So that's basically what covers chapter 8 and 9. Chapter 8 just kind of talks about how everything goes, like with how they had to be anointed with oil and things like that. And then chapter 9 gets into their ministry actually beginning and what they had to do to just basically get the ball rolling. Then we kind of have an incident that happens in chapter 10. So we've gone through all these different details and informations on what to do. It's listed. Like, I guess I'm not really going to go over a whole lot of it with you. I highly recommend going and reading it for yourself. But it's a lot of information that we just don't deal with anymore. We don't make sacrifices anymore because Jesus Christ was the ultimate sacrifice and died on our behalf. That's what all this is talking about. They had to make these offerings and sacrifices in order to be near to God, because God was down with them in the tabernacle, and God is holy. And in order for them to be near Him and be in and around Him, they had to be holy themselves, and that's what God calls them to be. He wants them to be holy. So all this stuff is talking about how they can stay holy, stay clean. And it also goes into details on like what happens if you become unclean. Just because you're unclean doesn't mean that you're done for. But I'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But chapter 10, we come to an instance where it's Nabadad and Abihu, which are two of Aaron's sons who are within the priesthood with him. They go in and offer an unauthorized fire. And because this happens, the fire of Yahweh comes out and completely consumes them. Well, not completely consumes them, but it consumes them. They die. The fire kills them. And if you remember back in some of the videos I made towards the end of the Exodus series, the Lord warned people when he was on Mount Sinai, hey, stay away from the foot of the mountain, because the Lord's power is that strong. If you're not pure and everything, he even said to animals who are actually, they don't have sin like we do. He said, keep the animals away also, because if they get near the mountain, they will die. And this is the same thing. If you get near to the Lord and you are unclean or don't follow the procedures that he has laid out, there are consequences. And in this sense, the consequence was death. So it's just showing how awesome the Lord's power is, just being in his presence. And after all this happens, the Lord has Moses talk to Aaron and his other two sons, and they were not allowed to mourn for the loss of their family, because it would cause them to be unclean, to be ritually unclean. And he goes into detail also. It talks with Moses and Aaron how the Lord is reminding Aaron exactly what it is he has inherited and how he has to follow all these regulations. And at the close of the chapter, we have another incident where it's a burnt offering, and a portion of it was supposed to be burnt up, and part of it was supposed to be consumed by the priest. And the whole thing was burned up instead. Actually, I don't think it was a burnt offering. Let me double check that. Since it was blood, was not taken into your holy place. Okay, so it wasn't. It was a sin offering, and they're burnt offerings before the Lord, but such things as have happened to me. So basically what happened is the offering was supposed to be partially consumed, but instead it was fully burnt up. And Aaron goes in and says to Moses, hey, after the trauma I've suffered with the loss of my sons, I messed up. And Moses heard this and he's like, okay, I understand. I get it. I'm satisfied with what you say, what you have said here. I completely agree and I understand. Then we get into chapter 11. It switches gears. It, stops talking about the priesthood for a while. And it just lists out a whole lot of detail on clean and unclean food. And, there's types of fish, like you have to have, you're only allowed to consume fish with scales. And it's just a lot of this stuff is talking about if you consume these, you become unclean. And again, this uncleanliness is dealing with being pure and holy to be in God's presence. It even talks about how you're not supposed to touch the carcass of an animal that's unclean. And it even says, like, though, you're not unclean forever. It talks about how you can become clean again. Just like here, when it says anyone who eats some of its carcass must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. So if you were to eat of this animal, whatever, that was dead, or something of that nature in the wild, you were able to wash your clothing and clean yourself, but you would be unclean for a period of time. So chapter 11 is just a whole list of stuff like that. Talks about different animals that chew the cud, have a certain kind of hoof. Like I said, certain birds you can eat. Like, obviously, a lot of people around the world eat chickens. Chicken's a big food source around the world, but I'm going to say a lot of people don't like to eat eagles. I'm sure it's illegal in a lot of places. But birds of prey are also something that we're not allowed to be eaten. Um, like I said, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this stuff. I'm just trying to just do like a little summary and get through Leviticus, because a lot of Leviticus it goes into detail on you're clean, you're unclean. If you become unclean, this is how you become clean again. This is what the priests have to do. This is what has to be offered. This stuff we don't deal with today as Christians, because the laws were filled full when Jesus was here and when he died on the cross. But I still want to go over this a little bit and summarize things. Like I said, it's just a lot of information. I barreled through it, and I know a lot of people kind of get in this point and start like, "Oh, this is so boring," and just kind of put it down for a little while and don't pick the Bible back up, because it is a lot to take in. But like I said, it's an interesting read. I'm gonna talk about chapter 12 here, and it's basically talking about purification after childbirth. Like, a woman has a child, she's considered ritually unclean for a period of time, and until this period of time is passed, she is going to stay unclean, and you're not supposed to be around her or near her until she is clean again. Then we come to chapter 13 and 14, and it's so long. Chapter 14 is actually chapter 13 is the longer one. They actually may be about the same. But chapter 13 and 14, they address things like with infectious disease, skin disease. It says lepers, which that disease was mentioned back in Exodus. It was a very, contagious, common disease back in those ancient times, which there were just like boils and stuff on people's arms. So basically, chapter 13 goes into detail on what a priest must do, how they are to determine if this person is clean or unclean because of this. Goes into things like if they need to be quarantined, what needs to be washed, how it needs to be washed. And 14 goes into more detail on the cleansing and how things are to be cleansed on that matter. Like I said, it's a lot of details and information that we just don't deal with anymore. So, let's see. Just like, okay, well, I'm just going to go into I'm just going to throw in chapter 15 here. Chapter 15, it's talking about just, I really hate to say the word, but discharges coming out of the body and how that's unclean as well. And if you're in and around, or like a woman lays with someone or a man lays with someone who has this, they're considered unclean, and gives details on what you have to do to become clean again, if you can be clean again, and things like that. So a lot of that stuff is just talking about how, again, I'll say it, you were clean, you become unclean. How do you become clean again? Well, what happens if you're clean and you become unclean again? It's all about being ritually clean to be with the Lord in and around the tabernacle. That's what all this was talking about. But I'm going to cut it off right there. Leviticus is just a lot of information to cover, and like I said, I'm just trying to summarize it. and get through it. Numbers isn't much better. But after Numbers, you know, things will pick back up. You know, things get pretty crazy in Deuteronomy. All right. Well, that's where I'm going to end this video. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. And as always, God bless.